Hello and welcome to yet another video. I'm Bolboaca. I'm coming to you from the Mozaic Works studios, and today I'd like to have a chat, as usual, with Adi about this time about theory of constraints. Hi Adi, how are you?
Hello, I'm great.
All right, before we start, we haven't seen you for a while, so do you have any news? What have you done in the meantime?
Yes, keeping pretty busy with customers, so that's why probably I wasn't available, having different things to do, and that's how things happen. Sometimes there are periods when you're busier, and yeah, there you go. The customers are our priority in the end, and yeah, very interesting things. We are working on improving some, let's say, process aspects or way of working aspects, but also working on a product, on a new product from the beginning. So probably today we're going to talk about the theory of constraints that is about the first topic about improving the way of working.
All right. And before we go into the conversation, I also have some news. A few things that might be interesting for our listeners. First of all, I answered to all the comments on YouTube. So if you posted a comment, we answered those, and I hope I've seen even some interesting conversations. Don't hesitate to post comments. And thanks a lot to everybody who posted. I can see here, so for example, Yuri, Ferdinando, JM, Elisei. So a lot of good comments. Some of them with corrections, some of them with bringing more information to our interesting conversations. Second thing, CPP Europe. We have a conference that will come in 10 days from today, 24 May 2022. It's a live online conference. You can register now. Still 10 days to register. It will happen online on Crowdcast. We've done this conference. This is the 6th edition. And the schedule is great. If you are interested in C++, join us. It will be very interesting. We have people like Mark Gregoire, Mateus Pus, Rainer Grimm, sorry, Tudor Gârba, Francesco Zoffoli, Rando Angelescu, and Eric Nibler. They are our speakers, and it will happen during one day, 24th May. So let us know. Join the conference. You'll find all the information on cppeurope.com. Third thing, again, we are looking at growing our community. And one thing that I thought is, how about we do a live YouTube transmission? And I think this would be very cool because we'll hang out with you, with everybody who listens to us and who wants to hear more of what we want to say. So stay tuned. We are still working out when this will happen, probably after CPP Europe, a couple of weeks after. And so sometimes end of May, beginning of June. This is what I'm thinking right now. If you have any ideas for a topic, please let us know. We'd love to know if you want to interact on something specific. We can per program, or we can, do some exercises together with you, like do some practice. Not necessarily programming, but we can also do some practice in terms of, I don't know, writing user stories or building a user story map or things like that. Of course, as much as we can in 1 hour or so. All right, so that's the third thing. And with this being said, let's go back to the topic for today, theory of constraints.
Yes.
So Adi, you were telling me that you have recently used this. I have also recently used this, but let's see perhaps your context a bit.
Yeah, so we work with a quite large team in an organization that is going through a transformation of their way of working. They were previously working in in a siloed approach, meaning you had the development team, the analyst team, the testers team, the automation testers team. Then you had the supplier team, and everybody was doing part of the work, and the information would pass from one to another. And you'd have people allocated to the projects from each of those teams. And of course, sometimes those people would be allocated to more projects, not only one. So we moved from that for the last year or so to a organization where you have basically a team with dedicated people. Nothing new about this, right? You prefer to have this way to minimize the overhead and to work with focus on one product. And because it's a long-lived product, something that will live as long as the organization will live, it makes sense to have such a way of working. On top of that, there is very much pressure for developing and producing new features because of the market. There are many areas where the market is very dynamic, and this is one of these situations. And this is why it's very difficult to come up with a lot of ideas to improve and put them in the roadmap, because there's a lot of pressure to deliver, which is not ideal. But there are quite a lot of types of pressure from many sides. And of course, there are several options here. You could go and say, we want a percent of the roadmap for change, for improvements. You could say, let's have a parallel team working only for some aspects of, I don't know, like building a framework or something like that. But for that, you need budget approved, and that's not the case here. Or you can have another option, the third, which is to try to use the capacity that you identify that's not used in that team to make sure that you try to improve the way of working. And that's what we're going to talk about. Probably there are other options as well, but those are the main three, I guess, that come to my mind. And in this situation, the third, that's what we're going to talk about here, by how we can use this theory of constraints to improve the way of working by having very limited capacity, but still trying to move on.
Right. And that's precisely the case very often. And the typical example that I give is, let's say you have a bunch of developers and a few testers, because that's usually what happens. And the developers just build and build and build more code and push it forward. They say, okay, we are done developing. But the testers are overwhelmed by the requests to test, right? And this is very, very common. And then what happens is the first impulse of managers is obviously to hire more testers. And you know what the problem is with that?
you'll have a lot of testers, and then you'll have some other moments when the testers won't have a lot of work,
That's
and you have a lot of overhead, and you have you need
yeah,
team leaders, and you need to coordinate, and
yeah.
so on.
So there's coordination cost, of course, but there's also the problem that initially, if you have a bottleneck with testers, and if you hire more testers, who's going to train those testers? Probably the same testers who are the bottleneck now.
Yeah.
So they will become even more of a bottleneck. Now, of course,
Yeah.
ideally, you'd have people that are already prepared to take over, but we know that's not the case. Usually,
Yeah, or you have a team leader who could do that in a way, or
mm,
someone in the organization who trained them, and you have this onboarding training kind of organization, and that could save the situation.
yeah. And the way you see that this is a problem is that testers are very stressed. Developers are not very stressed. They tend to be more relaxed in this situation.
Mm.
And then if you go to the ops people, they have nothing to do because there's nothing coming through. So
Mm-hmm.
and this is how you find out this situation that you have a problem in your chain. And perhaps if I can show my screen really quickly. Right. This is the official website, Theory of Constraints Institute. And it explains the problem. It says, why it's called theory of constraints, because every chain has a weak link and everything depends on the weakest link.
Mm-hmm.
Or similarly, what you can imagine is that you have a constraint that limits the output. So if you don't have enough capacity, let's say in testing, then that will be the constraint that limits the output. Now, as we'll see, the weird thing is that the constraint will keep moving throughout the system.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So sometimes it will be in testing, sometimes it will be in development, sometimes it will be in IT or in operations and so on. And so this is the basic and the fundamental problem that Eliyahu Goldratt, I hope that's how you pronounce his name because I've never actually pronounced him. It's Goldratt, I know, but and Dr. Goldratt has come with this, noticing this kind of problem, and it's a management problem. So it's not something related specifically to development. It's about managing in general.
Yeah, exactly. So this situation is very common, and it's like now typically it's a solution to patch up something else, right? If you're, for your example, you're trying to hire more testers, maybe not that is the problem. The problem is that you don't have the good enough quality, or you need to improve the way developers write the code, or whatever is before testing, right? Maybe it's not just development, maybe it's also environments not working properly. That's another situation that we have. uh, so that's why you need more testers, and sometimes it might seem the solution, but it's not in fact the only solution that you need to look for. Maybe you do need more testers, but maybe you do need many other things to do.
Yeah. And so what we find with the theory of constraints, because this is what is so the original expression of theory of constraints is the 5 focusing steps.
Mm-hmm.
And the basic idea is that you don't start by hiring people. Right. You start by doing something else. You start by uh, looking at the current capacity and seeing, first of all, can you utilize the existing capacity better? So one example is, if you have a bottleneck in testing, let's not send testers to meetings anymore. Let them just do the testing and nothing else. Or minimum overhead. Maybe they need to attend some meetings for coordination or something like that, but just the minimum thing that they absolutely need to in order to do the testing.
Yeah, so for this one, I really have a very practical example where at this moment the testers were using some kind of a way to report the test results that wasn't at all efficient. So we started as an experiment to use a tool for this that makes for probably half an hour of their time. So by using this tool, probably they should meet half an hour less daily, and that's one of the ways of looking at this. So if you have, I don't know, 10 testers, half an hour each day, that means a lot. Probably, I don't know, but if I'd make the right computations, probably have one more tester per month or something like that.
Mm.
So only by that. And people, I don't know, typically don't look at these situations, and they would just say they're too busy, or that they have a lot of things to do, or they have a lot of meetings. But you need to look at this as well and really come up with very practical solutions on how to optimize the situation.
Yeah. Another way you can look at it is, okay, we have a bottleneck, let's say in testing. If developers keep pushing new features, they won't get through testing anyway. So it's just, it doesn't help. So how about we take developers and they help the testers for a while?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So
we allocate some capacity.
Mm-hmm. That's another solution, and with this team we started working with the specification by example (BDD). When you have developers involved right from the start, and they start writing tests, automated tests, right when they know what they need to develop. So in a parallel way, you'd have automated tests written together with the new feature. In this way, they will also help at least solve the repetitive types of tests, minimize the time the manual testers that only existed until then to run repetitive test suits. And also they will probably understand better what are the types of mistakes they do, because those tests will come as a fast feedback to them. And they will maybe, let's hopefully it's not always like that, but hopefully they will improve their way of working, their coding, their skills by having less defects.
Right. And it's not only about testers, right? We just picked one example, but
because it's very common. I mean, it's probably the most common, because that's where everything crumbles in. It starts stopping, because there's where you check things. You start checking things, in fact, and that's why it's typical.
Yeah. But we've had another situation on one of our previous clients where one of the bottlenecks was actually the people who were giving permissions, creating accounts, and things like that. You remember that?
Yes, of course. But yeah, every organization, I think this happens.
And that was another type of bottleneck, which is not necessarily, let's say, within the team, or or even within the development department. It was outside. It was
Yes.
another type of department, more administrative stuff.
Mhm.
And once again, you look at it in the same way. If it is a bottleneck because those people are overworked, what could you do? Well, one thing you could do is to end up with a number of tools that offer self-service or something like that,
Mhm.
right? And with specific rules and things like that that you can. But in order to get there, you still need to go through a process of improvement, which you will only start by noticing, okay, we have a bottleneck there. What can we do? Let's first make sure that these people are utilized only for these types of requests. Second, let's make sure that we can uh, free some of their time, maybe add some other people who are not doing much, to help. You
Mhm.
can pick maybe a few developers, one developer from each team who you trust, and allow them to give permissions for the
Yes,
teams for
that's what
development.
we've done here in a way to democratize the on some of the areas. There are still places to go and places to work on, but that's really a good approach.
Yeah, and then you can improve the tools and all that. So, and maybe hire more people if you really need to.
Mhm.
Um, and I think another area where this might happen is with UX and with like more specialized roles. But even with UX, what ends up happening is even if you have one, two, or not enough people on UX, they will tend to build up the design language for your application, and then you make the decisions as a developer how to utilize that design language. So instead of waiting for them to give you everything, properly
Mhm.
designed and so on, you get the necessary rules and tools and templates and so on, so that you can build stuff and then perhaps only review or and test later
Yeah,
on.
so this sounds like a self-service thing again. I think
Right,
that's the way to go.
right. And these are applications of theory of constraints on different areas of development. Right.
Mhm.
Um, so what were some of the challenges that you had when trying to apply this?
Well, typically it's very people are not used to saying, "Look, we do this, but then let's consider looking at the opposite place maybe to find a solution." Sometimes it's not obvious why you need to do that. So the I think the first challenge is to really explain well how these aspects are changed in as a consequence, and start off with the experiments to try to validate and to show that it can work in this way. Then, to my surprise, even people who are were, let's say, trained as automated testers didn't have the right skills to to go on to create something more than they were just doing, basically running tests or writing some sort of automated tests. So then that's another surprise. You need to start training, and it takes a lot more time than what you thought would happen, or training on the job, let's say, technical coaching and so on, in order to have something that really makes sense. Um, Also, a surprise maybe is the fact that because of a certain past and certain history of what happened, most of the people in this team weren't at all used, or they weren't believing that automation can help.
Mm.
So it's a general mistrust in automation because they tried it once, it failed, and then okay, we go on manual testing, and that's all. That's all we can do. Yeah, so that's one approach. The other approach with optimizing the time of testers, that's I think it makes sense, and everyone agrees on that. The only challenge is to convince to you to introduce new tools, new practices, and as long as people are very used to having their ways, it can be difficult. It can take a lot of time to convince and to come back to the topic from another angle and try to go back with new ideas, or in a way shift or adjust your proposed solution to that until people agree to at least try to experiment to use some new tools, some new practices that would alleviate this bottleneck and minimize the overhead for these people. So there can be many challenges, I guess, but these are something very typical.
Yeah,
Also,
and
yeah, please.
to go back to the first one, because I found it quite interesting, it's very common that people tend to look at their area for where to improve instead of outside their area.
Yeah.
And that's why I believe you often need a manager who looks at the system rather than looking at one area. That's one fundamental change. And I've also discovered there's another role that can help with this, and that's a business analyst.
Mm-hmm.
Because business analysts, well, at least if according to the business analysis book of knowledge, they should look at how to improve their organizations. And some of this is by building software or things like this, but some of this is by optimizing processes.
Mm-hmm.
So in theory, you can apply the same tools for analysis that you apply for example, for automating a process inside your company.
Mm-hmm.
But I've noticed that not many people have these skills that, linked to systems, looking at the system rather than one small part, and looking at how to optimize that system, how to optimize the flow in this case, because that's what we are trying to optimize, the flow on the whole value stream rather than just optimizing one thing. And if you try to optimize, let's say you have testers who are the bottleneck, but you are optimizing development, and then suddenly you'll get more development, but you won't get anything out because it's still more things to test. So nothing gets out.
Yes. That's unfortunately that's how things happen. And again, unfortunately, I started the story by saying that this organization can be any organization. Most of the organizations worked and still work like that, in a very siloed approach, having very specialized teams. None of the managers or team leaders from that area would know what to do with the other area. And their managers, so let's say you have, I don't know, the boss of IT or something, I don't know. Typically, the boss of IT wouldn't know anything about what they do in detail because everything is delegated to them. So it's almost impossible to understand how the system works.
Right. And that's very interesting. So actually, we can give some practical advice here. It's one way you can approach this is through value stream mapping. So but you have to look at the whole value stream. So you define your value stream from the moment you get a request. And in this case, let's say it's a feature request or a user story, or you have an idea for a feature or whatever. or a bug, doesn't matter, right? And you start from there and you map all the steps in relative detail to the moment when that feature is started to being used by somebody, by a real user,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you map this, and then you can look at things like cycles, you can look at delays, you can look at um, wait time, so processes waiting one after another. You can look at things that happen in parallel. And this is a kind of analysis that you can do as a group of managers. So if you have only the, let's say, the development manager, the tester manager, the ops manager, and so on, then you come all together and you look at this analysis and you figure out what you need to improve. But you have to come with an open mind, right? Because if you don't want to change anything, guess what? It will be very hard to do anything. But if you go in this with an open mind and you look at it like, how do we optimize the whole value stream and not only my area or your area or that guy's area, then we can actually go very far, because everything starts by noticing the problems.
Yes, exactly. So that's a tool that you can use if you want to visualize everything. Now, with with the experience, by looking at many organizations, you see that
Yeah,
without having needing to have this using this tool. Of course, I think this tool will help you have the global view as well and help all the others understand and align on what's needed to improve.
right.
So it's useful either way. Also, I think it's important that it's very important. You said it already, but it's important to stress the fact that you need to have people in this value stream meeting workshop from all the areas. So it's really important, because if you don't have people from all the areas, is exactly what I said. Probably you'll have someone else or some manager, some, I don't know, someone from top management who didn't know what's going on in that area and would say, "Yeah, everything looks fine," you know. Um, and then what's very interesting is that people start having conversations like, our testers are too busy. Yeah, but your programmers just deliver not enough quality. But what do you mean not enough quality? Well, this, but we didn't agree on that. So you start seeing misalignment. That's already the start of solving some parts of the issues, and you start having, let's say, some kind of more or less contracts in between these, at least as a starting point. It's not ideal, but only by discussing this into a workshop of, I don't know, half a day, you could start seeing improvement. So with quite a small cost, you could start seeing improvement just on the fact that people were there, discussed their problems, and they started acknowledging what they need from each other.
Yeah. And let me touch on a few things. One of them is, you said with experience, you will see where the bottlenecks are. Yeah. And one simple way I've done this is, whenever I go into an organization, I start interviewing all the roles.
Mm-hmm.
And you can already see the people who are relaxed and the people who are stressed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's already the first example of the first pointer towards where the bottleneck is. It's probably where the people are stressed and the others tend to be somewhere else on the chain. And I've noticed this in an organization that was very focused on, it was working in a kind of task slash project based style. And in this case, the business analysts were kind of like both project managers and analysts. So what they were doing is they had the request, they were analyzing the request, figuring out who can do that, estimating it, and then delegating it. And of course, the business analysts were very stressed, and the
Mhm.
developers were extremely relaxed because for the developers, you got a task from somewhere, and the task would mean, for a small project, that would mean like 4 to 6 weeks. And then you went on with it, nobody asks you anything. And at the end, you deliver or you delay. And in that case, yeah, you need to have a chat with somebody. But other than that, quite relaxed. One of the challenges with these types of organization is that the people who are very relaxed will change. It will be more difficult to change
Yeah.
their work, right? Because they will love to keep that.
Hmm.
And if you come and say, okay, so why don't you do more of X, do more of analysis, do more of testing, do more, it will be very tough. So you need to pay attention to this.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Uh,
Um,
but it's still something that you need to do, and even in that areas, you can find reasonable people who would try, or even who understand from the beginning that there is a problem, and they could be part of the solution.
yeah, and they can improve. Um, right. And I think there's there's a lot more to talk about here, right? Because
Yes, yes, of course. There's a lot to talk about theory of constraints. The main point, I guess, it's never when you need to improve to come up with any change, never put more pressure on the bottleneck.
yeah,
So even if that's the crucial thing you need to improve now, you want to improve something, I don't know, anything, and the solution, as you look at it, implies that the bottleneck will be more pressed, more forced to more. That's wrong. First of all, you need to do something else to prepare to have more capacity in that area. And that doesn't mean hiring. When you have that capacity, make sure you keep it and try to negotiate not to bring more features or more work. Try to negotiate to keep it like that for a while because you need that capacity to invest in the change that you had in mind.
yeah.
So that's the way of working with the theory of constraints, and it's not at all intuitive as far as I saw talking with many people.
And just one thing that I wanted to add, I think one issue, um, especially when you have different departments with different managers, each manager will have their own KPIs.
Mm-hmm.
And those KPIs can push them into a direction of local optimization. And
Exactly.
that's a big challenge. So if you really want to improve the whole value stream as a high level manager, you need to change the incentives. So in that case, the main um, there are a few KPIs that you need to look at that need to become standard for the organization. The cycle time. So how long it takes from when we got a request until it has been delivered. And I don't care if it gets stuck in ops or in testing or in development. If it gets stuck somewhere, the whole organization doesn't work correctly or not optimum, right?
Yeah, you need to measure that. Yeah.
And you need to measure that and you need to improve that. Another thing that you'll look at is probably quality. So how many bugs were reported by users? And so we lost because the other way around is okay, we are going very fast, but we are not developing at a high level of quality. And
And that means you have defects that eat from your capacity to develop more. So and at the end, it's a lot more costly.
yeah, And just to mention, we won't go into detail this time, but theory of constraints and a lot of the things that we discussed now also goes hand in hand with queuing theory, which basically tells us how to optimize a process when we have defects. So fundamentally, if you have process A followed by process B and then you get defects, what you need to do is to take a bit of process B and do it before process A. And that's how you improve. And this is how we get, for example, to test-driven development, or to acceptance test-driven development, or to BDD, or to automated deployments, or to...
Generally, it's called shift left, right? Because you have you had this waterfall approach, analysis, development, testing, and then deployment. And that's why you do shift left. So you shift left testing towards analysis. That's how you have specification by example, or BDD. That's how you have what you said, acceptance test driven development. You move deployment towards left, towards analysis, because in this way you'll have DevOps. So generally speaking, I think this is one very good example of queuing theory applied in practice, what's generally called as shift left.
All right. So this was a brief introduction to the topic of theory of constraints with just a few examples from our experience. Anything else you'd like to add at the end, Adi?
I think it's very interesting to use it like that. And in practice, of course, you have a lot of barriers, and you need to have a lot of discussions, and have a lot of, sometimes documents and presentations and so on. But in the end, if you start using it and if it makes sense, you start gaining trust in that organization. So that's why probably the first things you need to do are something where you're quite confident that you can improve by using the theory of constraints. And after doing a couple of these, you start doing the bigger, more complicated things. So try small, work incremental, work with small batches of improvement that will make are surely successful in the beginning.
Right, and if you want to learn more about this, we actually have a learning program that's called Advanced Agility, Agile Adoption for Managers. You can find it on mosaicworks.com. It's a learning program that we developed specifically for managers who are looking not only at solving their current problems, but actually going one step ahead. So perhaps they have started the Agile transition, or they have a stable system there, but they want to go one step forward. And we discuss about more advanced techniques there. So let us know if you find them useful. All right, so this has been it for now. Theory of constraints. Have you used it? What do you think about it? Have you read the book about theory of constraints? Have you applied it in practice? Do you want to apply it in practice? Let us know in the comments. And once again, let me remind you, we want to do a live YouTube transmission. So if you have any topic in mind that you would like us to try, let us know and we'll do that. Thank you, Adi, so much for participation today.
Thank you as well.
And thank you all for watching. Leave us a comment, like, subscribe, share with other people, ask other people about what they feel about theory of constraints, if they heard about it, and if not, why not. And until next time, remember to think design and work smart.